Everyone, welcome to Joy Meets World. I am your host, Joy Yuki, and on this podcast, I'm talking about traveling around the U.S., seeing our national parks with my sweet dog, Quincy, the foxhound, who's 5 years old and is currently running around outside, having the time of his life in the fenced-in backyard in this Airbnb. So fun times for us all. Um, where I left you guys off was in Grand Junction, Colorado, where I was staying to see the parks in southeastern Utah, Arches National Park and Canyonlands National Park. I drove an hour south, just 60 miles, to Montrose, Colorado, which is 20 minutes outside of the next national park called Black Canyon of the Gunnison. If you've never heard of this park, you know what? You're not alone. I'd never heard of it either until I started planning for this trip, and I was so curious to visit it because it's, again, like nobody knows about it. I didn't know much about it. It's not talked about hardly at all. It is one of the least visited national parks. I think it is 43rd. Yes, 43rd visited park out of 59 national parks. So it does not get a ton of visitors. I would say don't go in the winter. Go after April 15th because, like a lot of the parks, it is high elevation and closed during the winter due to ice and snow. So I actually went in mid-April, and the South Rim Drive, which is where most of the hiking and the viewpoints had just opened the day before. So I totally lucked out and am super grateful for that. It became a national park pretty recently in 1999. So it's one of the newer national parks. And it is named, there's two parts to its name, so the Black Canyon and then the Gunnison. So the Gunnison is the river that runs through the canyon. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, similar to how the Colorado River runs through the Grand Canyon, the Gunnison runs through the Black Canyon, and it's named for the man who discovered the area, Mr. Gunnison. And it's actually kind of crazy. It drops 43 feet per mile, which is, I always like to compare things because that really doesn't mean anything until I compare it. So it drops 43 feet per mile compared to the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. That's 6 times more than the Colorado through the Grand Canyon. And it's much, much narrower. So the narrowest part of the canyon is only 40 feet wide. It's the narrows. And the cliffs are very, very sheer. It's a very narrow gorge with sheer cliffs. One of the cliffs, the Painted Wall, is 2,250 feet tall, which is 1,000 feet taller than the Empire State Building. So just these monumental cliffs into this tiny, tiny gorge that drops down very, very steeply with the river. And that is where the other part of the name comes from. The Black Canyon is because it's such a narrow gorge and the walls are so high, it doesn't get a ton of sunlight. There's one part of it that only gets 30 minutes of sunlight a day. So the rock, the gorge is a dark, I would say like a bluish, brownish, black rock anyway, and then with the lack of sunlight it looks black, so that's where it gets its name, Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Again, the South Rim Road, which is at the west entrance, was open. It has 12 viewpoints along it. Some are just viewpoints that you are just in a parking lot and you walk a couple steps and you can look down. Some are short little hikes, like between 300 and 700 feet. So probably like 5 to 10 minute hikes out to the edge where you can see the viewpoints. One of those was the Painted Wall, which I talked about, and it's called that because it has these stripes of white rock that run through it. One of them looks like a dragon, so it's called the Dragon Head. so that was really cool to see. My other favorite spot to stop was at High Point, which is the last stop on the South Rim Road. And from High Point, you can do a hike that's 1.5 miles on the Warner Point Trail, which is a little bit of a harder hike, not too strenuous, but a lot more inclines and declines. And at the end of it, you had this 360-degree view of the San Juan Mountains, the West Elk Mountains, of course, the canyon, the valley, the Uncompahgre Valley, which is spelled Uncompahgre. So I'm not sure if I said that right. I'm assuming it's a Native American tribe and language, which I'm not good at pronouncing. But if you know how to pronounce it, let me know. So it was a really cool view, again, on the Warner Point Trail. And then I went back the next day. Since it was so close to where I was staying, I could go back several times. And I hiked a loop around the visitor center on the South Rim. It's actually kind of 3 loops in one. So the Rimrock Trail starts at the visitor center and it follows the edge of the canyon. And then it runs into the Uplands Trail, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're not at the canyon. You're kind of farther back on this flat trail, sort of in like the grasslands and like shrub forest, not a real forest, but a super easy hike, not near the canyon. And then the Uplands Trail runs into the Oak Flat Loop Trail, which eventually gets you back to the visitors center. And all of that together is just about 5 miles. So, a pretty decent hike for an afternoon. Not too hard, but gives you a little bit of a challenge. I will say that the Oak Flat Loop, so the last trail that I did, was on the side of the canyon. So it was steep. It was a thin kind of canyon trail with switchbacks. But I guess it was on the side of the canyon that doesn't get the sunlight because there was still a lot of snow and ice on the trail. And where the sun did get in and melted the snow and ice, it was thick mud. I've never seen such thick mud on a trail. It was probably maybe an inch or 2 in places. And this trail, of course, was, as I said, thin and kind of the side of I wouldn't say a cliff, but it was steep on the one side, and it was slow going. It was a little bit scary at times because it was so slippery. The mud was even more slippery, and it's not flat at all. You're either going up or you're going down. And so the potential for slipping was a lot. So it was just baby steps the whole time, holding onto tree branches and rocks, whatever I could find to make sure that I didn't slip. And then what happened was I got almost to the end of the Oak Flat Loop Trail, almost to the visitor center, and I could see out my map. And I stopped. There was a sign on the trail. I probably had a quarter of a mile to go. There was a sign on the trail that said wilderness permits required beyond this point, but that hadn't been on the map, the national park map that I was carrying. It didn't say anywhere that, this loop that you would, for part of it, you would have to complete the loop, you would have to get this wilderness permit. So I was confused. I was a little bit ticked because I didn't want to go back and redo the whole loop because all the snow and ice and mud. I knew I was only a quarter of a mile to the visitor center, so I just went for it. I just, passed the wilderness permit trail because I just, I thought, okay, I'll be there in 10 minutes. How hard could it be? Well, that was a huge mistake because it was an insane trail. So take all the conditions I just described before, and then instead of switchbacks across the mountain, you're just going straight down, and the trail turns into just rocks you're climbing over and sliding down. like the back of my legs and my ankles hurt because it was such a steep incline going down. And it was, I mean, I'm not good at judging distances when hiking, but it seemed a lot farther. I kept thinking I should be there already, or I should at least see it ahead. And it was going down, down, down. And all I could think was, oh my gosh, like, if this trail goes down to the bottom of the canyon, I have to get back up it to get to the visitor center, at the top of the canyon. And this seems wild. It just seemed crazy to me. So I reached this one point where it was, if you can imagine rapids in a river, but straight down, like all these rocks that you're climbing down, basically mountain climbing backwards with your back to the mountain. And I got there and I saw some hikers up ahead who were doing the same thing, a guy and a girl. And the guy was much further ahead than the girl. She was still on the part that I was on. So I got closer to her and she just yelled to me, like, I'm going to wait here. You passed me. You're going a lot faster than me. And I was, winded, out of breath, kind of a little bit scared because this trail was crazy. And, I just asked her if she'd ever done the trail before, and she hadn't. And, I asked her how long it was. And then I said, this is the Oak Loop, the Oak Flat Loop Trail, right? And she said, oh no. And when she said that, I just wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. She said, oh no, back where there was a sign in the trail. There was actually that Oak Flat Loop Trail went off to the right. So I wanted to cry because I had just expended so much energy and I knew I was going to have to mountain climb that all the way back up, like all this dangerous, crazy terrain back up to where I had come and then take the trail to the visitor center. So I was depressed, but I was also very, very thankful that I hadn't gotten to the bottom before I realized this. And I would have been so confused, like where the loop trail was, maybe even gotten lost. So I'm really grateful I ran into these hikers, that I talked to them, that they redirected me. The climb back up was actually a lot easier. It was still hard. It was very, very hard. Let me preface it with that. But it was a lot easier than going down, I think, because I had a low center of gravity climbing back up. It was literally like mountain climbing. And I could grab onto rocks and I could grab onto roots growing out of the trail and the bottom of tree trunks. So it was a lot more stable. For whatever reason, I could see better spots to place my feet, like dirt patches or grass patches or, big rocks that I could grip. And I stopped a lot on the way back up because I was feeling a little bit dizzy, drank a lot of water, took a lot of rest because I just didn't want to fall down a cliff, like pass out and fall down a cliff. So I eventually made it back up. That was scary because my legs were already feeling like jelly, and then I had to climb all the way back up. I was feeling a little bit dizzy. I was getting that weird, like, when you sweat, you're really, really hot, but then you kind of get cold too. It was late afternoon, so the sun was kind of waning a little bit, so it was a little bit scary. I was relieved when I got back to that sign and I did see the trail. It had been covered in snow, so I think I just passed by it without thinking the first time. That trail was a quarter of a mile, but it was basically all uphill as well. Not as hard as the wilderness trail. Just a lot of switchbacks, again, covered in snow and ice and mud, so I had to go slow. Very tiring because it was still uphill. Had to stop a lot, but made it back to my car and made it through the adventure. And lesson learned: if they say a wilderness permit is required, a wilderness permit is required. And this is not the trail I'm supposed to be on. I get it. A wilderness permit must mean that you have to have certain equipment on you. I think the hikers had basically climbing cleats on and probably actual climbing gear. Not that it was an actual rock climb, but it was pretty difficult. So I think they probably want to make sure that, you have all the right gear and you're set up for success before you take that trail. So those were my adventures at the Black Canyon of the Gunnison near Montrose, Colorado. I definitely think you should come because it is one of the least visited parks, so it's not crowded at all. Really cool trails, really cool part of the world. My favorite part was definitely that hike on the Warner Point Trail. There was one point where you looked out and you just the valley with the patchwork quilt of farmland and then the mountains and um, there were these rolling hills. And I know it sounds corny, but it was insane. It was like I was looking through the window of an airplane. That was intense and amazing, and loved every second of it. It's really easy to get to. It's really close to a lot of stuff, so I would highly recommend visiting it and coming in the spring so that you can, the spring or the summer, so you can see everything. But if you have any comments or questions, go to my Instagram at JoyYugi and look at my reel and send me a message. You can follow me on YouTube and watch this podcast there if you want. I would love it if you would rate, review, and subscribe. That really helps other people who are interested in the national parks find this, and I would love for them to find it just so that, they don't make the same mistakes that I did. But till next time, I hope you are having happy travels wherever life is